Hello? Hello? Hello. Yes, this is fine. I got a pretty strong voice, so yeah, it's good. Talk like that and have this clicker. Yeah. Please. Don't touch the mic. No. No, no. No, 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 no. Of course. Yeah. Okay, everyone. I'm very glad to be invited here to the Cryosphere Pavilion at COP27 in the Sinai Desert. As a glaciologist, it's really exciting to be in the desert, which was actually my first thesis when I started reading geography. So, I want to take you on a journey uh, very, very far north and a place where few of us have been. It's an adventure, but it's also a scientific adventure. It's called the Jubilee expedition. But first, we have some commercial. It would not have been possible without the help from Carnegie funds. And this Carnegie Bank, they financed the first expedition of Adolf Erik Nordenskiöld 150 years ago. So big thanks to them. And also big thanks to all the other sponsors for without clothes, we would have freeze to death, I promise. And without skis, we've still been standing in the north of Svalbard. Without tents, we'd been blown away. And all that, and also rifles to protect from polar bears. And finally, the Färgfabriken, which will host photo exhibition that will in Sweden and go global this winter. So, who is this Erik Huss? I'm a Swedish geographer, educated in Lund University, but they didn't have glaciology there, so I continued in Stockholm University, studied glaciology and Earth system science. Um, I also have a degree in journalism, so I was a scientific editor for the former biggest network of Earth system scientists on the globe, International Geosphere Biosphere Program. After that, I was head of media for the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Maybe you heard about the Nobel Prizes in physics, chemistry, and economic sciences. So there was a lot of work with that, with the smartest persons on the earth. You had to really struggle to understand. I'm also a keen skier. I love skiing. It's my passion since I was a kid. So Protect Our Winters, I was part of creating this in Sweden. It's a movement that mobilizes the whole ski industry in the climate. Because if we get too warm climate, we won't have any skiing anymore. And then Plogga, you pick up trash while you jog. It has become the global environmental movement in Sweden all over. Who could believe that? We pick other trash and people love it. Then I started my own company 6 years ago, Sustainability. It's about science, take science into business, and so we can thrive, do business on the terms of the planet. And as a scientific advisory board, I have a Berlin Center for Climate Research, which I represent today, together with Researchers Desk, which is a network of researchers. So, the climate. Have anybody heard about the climate? Yes, maybe. So, in one graph, you could see here, this is when I was in Antarctica in the 90s. We did some ice dynamic studies. The result from these resulted in a deep ice core, 4,000 meters down, and we came back 800,000 years back in time. And that is 8 ice ages. And you see the the temperature and carbon dioxide, they follow each other. These are astronomical factors running the ice ages. But on top of that, we have the greenhouse gases strengthening or weakening. You can see the carbon dioxide levels has been, since 4 or 5 thousand years, it has been between 180 and 300 parts per million. When humans came in, we have increased that with 50%. And since carbon dioxide is such a long-lived gas, it lives for thousands of years. You can see that it's and 50% more. It represents climate that is 3 degrees warmer, and a 3 degree warmer world will be safe operating space for maximum 1 billion people on this planet, and we are heading to 10 billion. We might be 90% too many in just a couple of decades. So let's not go there, I'd say. So, topic of the day, expedition. I borrow a map from Adolf Fredrik Nordenskiöld. He drew this map 150 years ago. I found it in an old library. And this is how it looks. Very powerful, polar explorer, honor and bravery, like it was at that time. They went on this ship, Polheim, from Scandinavia up to reach the North Pole, but it was too much ice at that time. Too much ice, so you see, it's a little from they started from Longyearbyen up to this little Mossel Bay in 1872, exactly 150 years ago, and trying to reach, but they were stuck in the ice for 2 years. So they took their skis and sledges and worked over the Hinlopen Strait to the east, over to Northeastland, Nordaustlandet, as they say in Norway. And they skied. It took months. And this is the largest glacier in the whole Europe. Not many people know that. And we were planned to recreate this and see what has happened with the ice on the sea and in the mountains in 150 years to celebrate his bravery by the Jubilee expedition. So, where is Svalbard? Well, it's a little. Svalbard is actually an archipelago. It's the biggest island is Spitsbergen, and it's right between northern tip of Norway and North Pole. So it's pretty far north, you could say. But global warming. You heard about that. The Hinlopen Strait has been, stuck with ice for thousands of years. But when we went there, it was too risky because it was moving and melting even in the middle of the winter. So we had to change route, and we could not start from the Mossel Bay and go over the strait. So we had to take help from ski mobiles up to the starting point. So it took a whole day, 300 kilometers on a ski-doo, and 5 minutes before we reached our goal, I recognized that they had hand warmers in the handlebars. I didn't know. My hands were freezing. Stupid me. Well, this is how it can look. It is enormous ice fields. 95% of Svalbard is covered with ice, thousands of meters thick. And it's really, really, really beautiful when it's nice weather. Now, with so much more heat in the atmosphere, you have so much more moist and so much more bad weather. So normally May is like this. but we had maybe 3 days like this for a whole month. So route change number 2. We came up to the Polheim station where Nordenskjöld was situated for 2 years. That was the sea ice, and when there's sea ice, there are seals, and you know what eat seals? The biggest predator on this planet, the polar bear. And the polar bear doesn't fear anything. And it comes slowly, and the last 50 meters, it rushes in seconds. And you are just a piece of smorgasbord, as we say in Sweden. So it was really bad weather coming for 1 week. So the guide said we had to go around the corner, a peninsula, and then back again. But he's been working a lot in Svalbard. He said, no way I'm going in this bad weather. This is heaven for polar bears. We won't see it. We will only see the 2 black dots of the ice when it's too late. And if you shoot a polar bear, you have to go to the police in prison immediately because they are endangered species. So you do not want to encounter polar bear. So we had to change the route, go south. But before we did, we actually looked at the shore. We found plastics in the northern part of Svalbard. We found this. It's not an animal. It's actually an old pine tree from Canada. And we made some dating. It's over 5,000 years old. So halfway through the Holocene, this. And this is our guide. He's not that old, a bit younger. Really tough guy, Christer Jonsson. He knew weapons from he's brought up in the northern Sweden. So he took care of us. And he's standing right in front of the little cabin from Nordenskjöld. But we went south. But first day we went up on the glaciers, we thought, oh, normally on the summit of the glaciers, there's normally stable, this high pressure. But we had snowstorm for 4 days, minus 30 degrees, and storm winds. So it's chill factor of between 40 and 50 degrees minus. So when you went out to do your thing, number 2, in 30 seconds, your hands were totally frozen. So we had to be really creative not to freeze delicate parts of your body. So it was a challenge, really challenging start of this expedition. But finally, it cleared up and we had to move because we didn't have enough food to stay for too long. So we started to move with the GPS and altitude meters and watch out for crevasses. So you had to walk and you hear the sound when you come to a crevasse. And finally, there are 2 things I've been working as a glaciologist since the beginning of the 90s, and 2 things I've never seen in my life. First, we came around the corner down a glacier, down to a really big glacier, down to the Hinlopensträten, and there was supposed to be a lake, but there was no lake. We could just see a collapsed glacier. It was half a kilometer long, and the blocks were maybe 20 meters high. So probably there's been a called Jökulaup. It's a kind of ice-dammed lake that just collapsed because of the rapid melting. So and asked the glaciologist at Svalbard, nobody had ever seen this before. So this happened probably just before we came. The other thing was really sad. We actually had a silent minute, because I've seen retreating glaciers all over the world. But it's not a retreating glacier. It's a non-extinct glacier. The glacier is totally gone. And this is up in the Arctic, where it's supposed to be cold. So you can just see the lateral moraines, the terminal moraine, encompassing the area that once was a glacier. It's completely extinct. And that was really sad. I was actually crying when I saw this. I'd never seen it before. Then route change number 3. We're supposed to go down to Longyearbyen, all the way down. but we had reports from the satellite telephone. So they said it's not possible. The rivers had broken loose, so you will be stranded somewhere. So we had to find an exit. So we find, with the help of researchers at Uppsala University, the Nordenskjöldbren, named after Nordenskjöld. So it was kind of a destiny to end up at Nordenskjöldbren. And while we were exiting that way down to the sea ice, there was a big flood, and suddenly there was a kind of Jökull above us. So we had to throw ourselves up on the side. I didn't have time to take a photo by then, but all this was covered with flushing cold ice water. So these things can happen when it's this rapid melting. But finally, we went down to the sea ice. So this is sea ice, and what you see is the front of Nordenskjöldbren. To the right, you see a terminal moraine. And I thought, well, this is the old terminal moraine. You can see a lot of gravel on the lee side. On the storth side, you can see a lot of vegetation. So this was probably the 910 maximum limit of the glacier. And we see from above, you can see that the glacier has retreated 3 kilometers. One of the biggest glaciers in Sweden, Storglaciären, that's the whole length of this glacier that this has retreated. And this is one of the most stable glaciers on Svalbard. So a perspective of this is that if you look at this map, we helped Uppsala University with the glaciological measurements of stakes and movements and accumulation and ablation on this, and we could see that it didn't melt so fast. So we thought, well, it's not so much melting that we thought. But when we look at the whole Svalbard, the whole group, if we compare to the world, for 120 years, the world has heated up 1.2 degrees. And already this is 170 times faster than normal variations if we look back 3 million years. So it's the speed of change that we all discuss here. But on Svalbard, if we look from the end of the 19th century until today, this is the temperature curve from Svalbard. You can see that from the beginning of the 1970s, the latest 40 years, Svalbard has increased 1.25 degrees per decade. So that is 7 times faster than the normal rate on this globe. So when I figured all this out, I realized we must act. So what does the oil companies do? Well, the coming 3 years, they're planning to expand their extraction of oil in the Arctic, which is super sensible, with 20%, with the help of our banks. French banks, European banks, Swedish banks. Swedish banks finance this with 45 billion Swedish crowns. They have a green outside, but inside is really, really, really dirty. So what you hear is just greenwashing. Don't believe when they talk. Check where the money flows, and you see what's happening. And Gazprom is, of course, the biggest financer, from Russia. So when we came back to Longyearbyen, normally there would be snowmobiles all over, and snow. But they had, from one day to another, the snow just went away, and they were totally shocked. So when we came, there were snowmobiles all over. They didn't have time to move them back to the garage and in the small balconies where they have the snowmobiles. So it was a lot of lower snowmobiles. This was in end of May. And before we actually ended our expedition, this is the end of our expedition with the Nordenskjöld in behind, we said we must do a statement with all our impressions. So we found this driftwood, made a place for the smallest and northernmost climate summit in the world. And we made statements that will be presented in a movie that we will produce this winter. And it was a lot of things said, but what came to my mind is that, okay, don't leave any trash and take only photographs, but we can leave a positive footprint. And how do you leave a positive footprint? Where you talk about it, you learn, you discuss with people that maybe are not glaciologists what is happening and how fast it's happening. And this is the filmmaker. He's worked with David Attenborough, so he's pretty skilled. I promise, really skilled. Avi Rabelista. He's Philippine, half Dutch. He was sitting there, and we were discussing. So, what is Svalbard? Svalbard is actually the canary bird of the globe, because of what happens at Svalbard. If we know more what happens there, we know what will happen to the planet sooner or later if we don't act. So we have a perfect help. Number 4, right when we were going to be picked up at Cape Ekholm, the sea ice was just gone. In 2 days, the whole fjord was gone. So we had to jump inland and to get picked up. Luckily, we had this marine radio, so the guide could call a cruise ship. They could get us up, and on the cruise ship, there were beers and barbecue on the deck, and we had eaten this dry food for a month. That was marvelous. So this is the last picture of the expedition, and I just want to thank you for all your attention. And this was very short, so maybe you have anything, questions about blisters or glaciers or anything. the mood. This is your opportunity.
I think that was very cool. Sorry, that was very cool.
Oh, thanks.
I think you might have mentioned this, but I did not quite catch it. How long was the trip in terms of distance and days?
Yeah, it was about 30 days, and 300 kilometers. So it's not very much, maybe 10 kilometers a day. But we had a small skis and a park that was 80 kilos behind us. So you think that it must be easy some way, but when it's flat, it's pretty heavy because all the sastrugi is like sand dunes, but it's snow. When it's down, the park reaches you and tries to kill you. So we had to steer them like, wild sled dogs. And when we go up, yeah, you can just imagine the gravity makes you want to, yeah. So it was a struggle, but 10 kilometers per day, that was pretty heavy.
Thanks. I was astounded to see the images of the lake outburst floods. Could you speak a bit more about those? So were they proglacial lakes or were they subglacial? And what do you think the trigger was?
Yeah, it's called Jökulá in Icelandic, and I think it's a glacial lake outburst, Glof, they called outburst flood, and it's a glacier. It's pretty solid and heavy, and meltwater is accumulated on the sides and sometimes inside, and it's built up. So when it's normal, when it's growing, this is kind of drained away in the subglacial, intraglacial, and supraglacial channels. But when it melts so fast, it accumulates too much water, and when the pressure gets too hot, too much, and probably this was partly subglacial because this is not just sea ice, no, just frozen water. It was 20 meters thick, and you could see the years. So it's partly subglacial lake, and that was suddenly drained of something internal, quick happening. And if you see how fast things are happening, it's probably due to these faster movements because of the rapid heating. That is our theory, but nobody knew about this, so we would have to study this more. But it's probably a quickly drained subglacial lake. That is hypothesis, but it's a good question.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, that was very interesting. As a non-glaciologist, I might have some pretty basic questions. But you had mentioned that you guys came across a glacier that was, I guess, no longer a glacier because it was not moving anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't catch if that was something that you had just kind of discovered, and if so, how do you measure that or tell that it has stopped?
Yeah, we nobody knew about this. We spoke with a glaciologist at the University of Svalbard, UNIS, and also the researchers at Uppsala University who has been here for 30 years, and nobody knew about this. So it might have happened quite recently. And to be honest, this area is not so very often that people go with skis and sledges there, mostly skidos. And with a skido, you can go really quick, so you don't see everything. So I don't know when this glacier died or disappeared completely, but I've never seen it so clearly in these high altitude areas. I've seen it in our tropical areas and in the Alps, but there the melting is so much faster because of the heating. But it shouldn't happen in Svalbard.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just answer a quick follow-up question to that first question I asked, which do you think there was a surge in the glacier because of this lake drainage? Obviously, in Svalbard, there have been many glacier surges which happen over
Yeah.
the years.
Really good question. There are certain glaciers, and the certain glacier can be of many reasons because there are ice dynamics that are, this basal shear stress that it really affects the whole glacier. But they have seen more and more glaciers that are surging. So we were warned by two glaciologists that don't go on these glaciers because they move like 100 times faster than normal. And then you create crevasses in a couple of hours. A crevasse can open and then close. And that is really dangerous. So, and normal surge is when something happens to a glacier that affects the flow. Sometimes it can be really, really big accumulation that gets pressure, or it can be really rapid melting so that you have a lot of, it's like lubricates the glacier from below, so the gravity makes the ice flow much faster. So a hypothesis is that it's much more melting. And they had rain in the middle of the winter. They had rain in Svalbard, and it's supposed to be like 30 below. So probably because of rapid melting. It's not a, I think it's a good guess so far, because all of these surging glaciers. And we got this information 2 days before we went up, so we were quite lucky about that. So we had to change route actually 6 times because of these rapid changes. I can actually see that my dear colleague Susanna Hancock from Maine, she's here in the audience. So we shared a lot together. She knows a lot about me. Yes, please.
So you mentioned that Swedish banks would also fund this, and different banks. Do you have in mind any website or platform where we could check that? Like where?
Oh yeah, go into fairfinanceguide.com. You have all the information, and those are finance guys. They know all about banking, so they know how to check behind the nice facade. So everything is there, Fair Finance Guide International or Fair Finance Guide for Sweden. And then you just show it to your bank, and then you ask, so what's your plan? Why do you talk sustainability when you do this? Those hands should talk to each other. They have bipolarity, I think. But good question. Fair Finance Guide.
Me again. You mentioned about the polar bears.
Yeah.
So, from the memories of your guides, are the polar bears now roaming further inland than they used to do, and is it harder to find routes?
Yes, good question. I mean, that was actually my biggest fear, and a lot of us in the team. So we had a lot of discussions about this fear because avalanches and crevasses, I've been through that. We can take that in the post. I have a lot of stories about that. So I've been lucky so far, but I know how to avoid that. But when you meet something with 800 kilos and just want to eat you, and it's silent, you don't see it in the whiteout, and it just feels your smell, 1 kilometer away. So you really have to pay attention to the polar bears. But what was your specific question again? Sorry.
Just wondering whether changes in Svalbard and the
Oh,
ecosystems
yeah, I
are driving
remember
them
now.
further inland. So
Yeah,
that was
true.
a bigger risk than before.
Since there was all sea ice around Svalbard, even in the summer, that is gone. So polar bears, they live on the sea ice. They eat seals mainly. So they are moving towards land. So especially in Russia and in Canada, there's a lot of more polar bears coming into the villages and societies among houses, and that creates a stress which you might have to kill them, and they are endangered, so you should not kill them. So it creates a stress between humans and polar bears, I'd say.
Thank you.
But we were lucky, as you can understand. Yeah, the active listener, I like that.
I saw that you had collected some radar data potentially on the final glacier. What
Yeah.
are your plans now to do with this data, and what will you do with it?
We sent the data to the Uppsala University, and they will continue for this monitoring and scientific research on this specific glacier to follow up. For this expedition, we're actually done here. So now we have to collect all data and all impressions to do the film, to do the book, and so now we had to reach out not to other scientists because they know, but to the public and to the companies, to politicians, to really show. So the movie will not be a lot of graphs and numbers. It will be about feelings. So this Awi Rablista, he was filming, when you didn't know. And then so to catch the feelings of what happens when you experience this beauty and the horror of what's happening. So it was really, really difficult to capture these two feelings together. So sometimes it was really hard. And so we're just humans. I mean, some of us were scientists, but we're also humans. We just react when we see stuff, things we love. When that disappears, what happens? It's sorrow. But don't let it stop there. We want the sorrow to become action. So what I would like, if I can say something to you, is that embrace the sorrow, embrace the really tough feelings, but change them into power and action, because every one of us counts. Because sometimes people come to me and say, what does it matter if I do something? Then you can just reply, tell that to Greta Thunberg. That one person cannot change. She's a small girl, double diagnosis with autism. I've met her several times, and her father as well. She has big trouble with herself, but she's brilliant and she's stubborn. So don't give up. Just go there. Be activist, but you don't have to destroy things to be an activist. Just be active and be activist and change wherever you can do. Whatever you can do makes a difference. And then the snowballs will start rolling. And the glaciers might grow again. That's my wish. If I can make one wish, we would all benefit from that. So, thank you. I really like your interest. I'll be here for a couple of minutes so we can just have a chat, or over the bar or something. But I see you around, and thank you, all you viewers, to watch this preview of our Jubilee expedition that will be produced as a movie later this winter. Bye bye.